A tie that looks flawless on the rack starts failing within weeks. Not from stains, not from wear on the outside, from the inside. The fold at the tip stops springing back. A permanent crease sets in exactly where the knot sits. Untie it, and the fabric holds the shape of the knot instead of falling flat. Keep wearing it, and the tip starts to crack along that same fold line, a thin white seam showing through the silk like a scar. There is no way to press that back out. That is fused interlining. Glue instead of thread. We tested 5 brands that fail this way, and 3 that never do. Same accessory, same basic shape. Completely different lifespans. Starting with a brand whose ties go rigid before the 4th wear. Before a single brand gets named, you need to understand what is actually inside the fabric you are knotting every morning. Every necktie has an interlining. It is the hidden layer sandwiched between the outer shell and the back lining. And it is the single thing responsible for how a tie drapes, how it knots, and whether it survives being untied 10,000 times. Fused interlining is bonded directly to the shell and the lining using a heat press, somewhere around 150 to 170 degrees Celsius. It is the fastest, cheapest way to build a tie. A machine stamps the layers together in seconds instead of paying someone to sew them. But heat-bonded glue does not stay flexible forever. Every time the tie gets knotted, untied, steamed, or dry cleaned, that bond gets stressed a little further. Eventually, it lets go in patches. The shell separates from the interlining underneath it. That is the crack at the tip. That is the knot that will not release its shape. Once the adhesive fails, there is no repair. You are not fixing a fused tie. You are replacing it. Sewn interlining, sometimes called a floating interlining, is never bonded to anything. It is stitched into the lining alone, left completely free to move against the shell fabric above it. That single difference changes everything about how the tie behaves. Because the interlining floats instead of gluing the layers together, the whole tie can twist while you knot it and then untwist back into shape once you are done. The same way a well-built jacket lapel rolls instead of creasing. Most floating interlinings are wool or a wool blend, typically somewhere between 260 and 360 grams per square meter, chosen specifically because wool holds memory and recovers shape far better than the 100% polyester filler used inside a fused tie. You do not need a lab to tell the two apart. Open the back seam near the tip and look at the stitching. A fused tie will show a flat, glued edge with no give in the fabric. A hand-sewn tie shows a visible slip stitch, a loose thread running the length of the seam that lets the fabric move independently of it. Run a finger along the edge of the blade. Hand-rolled edges feel soft and slightly raised. Machine-sewn flat edges feel stiff and uniform. Check the tip itself. If it is self-tipped, the tip is cut from the same shell fabric as the rest of the tie, which costs more fabric and more labor. If it is a cheaper contrasting lining glued into place, that is another shortcut. Look for a bar tack at the stress points near the neck seam, a small reinforced stitch that only shows up on ties actually assembled by hand. Then there is the fabric itself, not just the layer underneath it. Silk is measured in mommy weight. A shell that feels unusually thin and throws off an aggressive, plasticky shine is very often not silk at all. It is polyester microfiber, woven to imitate the reflectivity of real silk and sold at the same price as the genuine thing. Every tie on this list gets judged against one seam. Does the interlining float, or is it glued? That single question is the difference between a tie that lasts one wedding season and one that lasts a decade of Mondays, and it has nothing to do with how sharp the pattern looks under store lighting. Cheap fused ties generally sit in the $15 to $30 range. Hand-sewn silk ties with a genuine floating interlining generally start around $60 and run up toward $150. Keep those two numbers in mind, because what you are about to see is exactly how little that price gap actually buys, and exactly how much it should. Grab a necktie off a department store rack for $20 and it feels fine in your hand. The shine catches the light. The knot ties cleanly enough in the fitting room mirror. Van Heusen sits at the very bottom of this list because that feeling does not survive contact with actual use. Open the back seam near the tip on one of their standard ties, and there is no slip stitch to find. The edge is flat and glued, sealed shut by the same heat press method used across nearly the entire budget tie market, somewhere in that 150 to 170 degree range that bonds the interlining directly to the shell. There is no floating layer underneath. There is no wool interlining, giving the fabric memory. What sits inside is a thin polyester filler, fused edge to edge, priced to move volume through big box retailers rather than survive a single humid commute. Leave one of these ties on a car seat through a hot afternoon, and the glue underneath does not need years to start reacting. Heat alone softens the bond enough to leave a faint crease exactly where the fold sat, long before the tie ever gets close to a dry cleaner. The complaints follow a predictable pattern once you start reading through them. A permanent crease sets into the fold near the tip within the first month of regular wear. The tie stops recovering its shape after being untied, holding the outline of the knot like a scar. Some buyers describe the tip going stiff enough to hold a fold on its own, standing away from the shirt instead of lying flat against it. At $20 to $25, this is not a tie built to last a career. It is built to survive a handful of wears before the bond starts giving out. And once that bond fails, there is nothing a dry cleaner or a steamer can do about it. You do not repair a fused interlining. You retire it. Nautica sits one spot above that, and the gap in price does not translate into a gap in construction. Push past $30 into the $35 range, and the method underneath the shell has not changed at all. Same heat-sealed bond, same polyester filler standing in for wool. What Nautica adds instead is a shinier shell fabric, the kind that photographs well under store lighting and reads as more expensive than it actually is. That shine is worth examining closely, because it is exactly the tell from the silk weight test. Real silk at a comparable MoMA has a softer, more matte reflection. What catches the light this aggressively on a mass-market tie is almost always a polyester microfiber shell dressed up to imitate silk, rather than the genuine fiber itself, sold at a price point that assumes the shopper will not look closely enough to notice the difference. Feel the edge of the blade on a Nautica tie, and there is no rolled softness to it, just a flat, uniform seam pressed shut by machine. Check the tip, and it is very rarely self-tipped. The lining underneath is a separate, cheaper fabric, rather than the shell material folded back on itself. Another small shortcut that adds up across the whole garment. Look for a bar tack near the neck seam, the small reinforced stitch that only shows up on a tie actually assembled by hand, and there is nothing there either, just the same continuous machine stitch running the full length with no reinforcement at the point that takes the most daily stress. None of these choices are hidden exactly. They are simply the standard playbook for any tie built to sit in that $25 to $35 bracket, a playbook that prioritizes shelf appeal over anything that happens to the fabric after the second or third wearing. Here is what should give you pause. $10 separates Van Heusen from Nautica, and construction-wise, that $10 buys you nothing. Same bonding temperature, same filler material, same seam that will eventually crack instead of recover. The only thing that price increase purchases is a slightly glossier finish and a logo that reads as a step up from the absolute bottom shelf. If a mall brand this close in price delivers an identical construction method, the question worth asking is how much higher up the price ladder that same shortcut keeps repeating itself, and whether the next name on this list, one people actually pay a real premium for, is doing anything differently underneath the silk. Perry Ellis sits third from the bottom, and the trick here is not in what the fabric feels like, it is in what the price tag pretends to be. These ties list around $35 to $40, but check any department store clearance rack in any season, and they are already marked down by half, sitting closer to $18 or $20 permanently, which tells you the discount price is the real price, and the printed number was always fiction. Open the seam near the tip anyway, and nothing about the construction changes whether you paid full price or clearance. Same heat-sealed bond holding shell to lining, same polyester filler standing in for wool, same flat, glued edge instead of a slip stitch you can actually feel move under your thumb. The shell fabric carries that familiar overbright shine as well, the kind that looks sharp under fluorescent store lighting and reads as noticeably flatter and more plastic once you get it under natural light at home. A brand that can only sell it half off is telling you exactly what it thinks the tie is worth, and it is not the number on the tag. Move one spot up, and the price finally starts to sting a little more. Tommy Hilfiger ties commonly run $55 to $65, sometimes higher with the flag logo stitched onto the keeper loop. $65 is not pocket change for an accessory. It is close enough to the $60 floor where genuine hand-sewn construction starts to become available elsewhere. Open the seam here, and the answer is the same one you have seen twice already. A flat, machine-sealed edge. No visible give in the fabric where a slip stitch should be. The shell often carries that same aggressive shine that signals a polyester weave dressed up to look like silk, rather than an actual silk mom weight doing the reflecting. At $65, that shortcut stops being a budget compromise and starts being a decision to charge premium money for a construction method that costs the manufacturer only a few dollars to produce. Check the tip for self-tipping, and you will usually find the same story, a separate contrast lining glued into place rather than the shell fabric folded back over itself. One more small cost saved at a price point that should not need to save it. And then there is Hugo Boss, sitting at the very top of this half of the list, the one that should sting the most. Because if you watched our suit breakdown, you already know this brand by reputation. Their ties run $80 to $90, priced to sit shoulder to shoulder with actual hand-sewn silk. Open the back seam, and the story does not change from a $20 mall tie. Fused interlining, heat-sealed bond, a shell that leans polyester blend more often than the marketing admits. The gap here is not just a construction failure, it is the widest dollar gap on this entire list between what the price promises and what the seam actually delivers. The same brand that sold you a fused jacket chest is selling you a fused tie tip right next to it on the same display table, and the advertising budget covering both is the only thing standing between them and the $20 rack at the front of the store. A logo, an advertising budget, and a glued seam sold at nearly triple what the actual materials and labor cost to produce. Here is the easy way to remember everything you just heard. A tie glued together on the inside will turn stiff. It will crack at the fold. It will not spring back after you take it off. A tie sewn together on the inside can bend. It can twist while you tie the knot. And when you untie it, it goes back to being flat and straight, the way it started. That is the whole test. Glue breaks down. Stitching does not. One material remembers its shape. The other one does not remember anything at all. 5 ties, 5 different price tags, from $20 all the way up near $90. Every single one of them chose the same shortcut on the inside, no matter what the outside looked like or what the logo promised. But there are 3 ties out there that never take that shortcut, made by people who sew instead of glue. And the difference is something you can actually feel the first time you hold one in your hand. Kent Wang is the first name that actually earns the price it charges, and the reason comes down to a single number. $75 to $95 gets you a fully hand-sewn tie, self-tipped in the same shell fabric rather than a cheaper contrast lining, with edges hand-rolled instead of pressed flat by machine. Open the back seam, and there it is. A visible slip stitch running the length of the tie, loose enough to let the fabric move independently underneath your thumb. Enthusiast forums keep landing on the same conclusion. This is the doorway price into real construction, the point where a shopper stops paying for a logo and starts paying for actual labor. It is also the price where the earlier test finally flips in the buyer's favor. The shell has real weight in the hand. The shine sits closer to a soft matte glow than a plastic flash, and the tip holds its shape after a knot, instead of remembering the crease. One step up sits Drake's, a London maker whose reputation is not built on marketing, but on what happens when you open the seam. Ties here run roughly $150 to nearly $200, and that number buys hand-rolled blades finished entirely by hand. A slip stitch sewn rather than machine-locked. A shell woven heavy enough that it does not need to lean on shine to look expensive. This is a heritage name that actually backs up its own history, instead of just renting it for a price tag. The same way a 200-year-old suit maker either earns its reputation stitch by stitch, or does not deserve to charge for it at all. The difference shows up the moment you handle one, next to anything from the avoid half of this list. The fabric has body instead of stiffness, and the fold at the tip moves instead of holding a crease. And at the very top sits Sam Hober, a name most people outside menswear forums have never heard, which is exactly the point. These ties are made to order, fully hand-sewn from the first stitch to the last, built around a genuine wool interlining rather than anything synthetic standing in for it, and they typically land between $95 and $150, frequently undercutting brands with a fraction of the actual construction quality. Forum comparisons keep ranking Sam Hober above competitors charging significantly more, not because of a name people recognize, but because it simply does what the rest of the industry only claims to do. Put two ties side by side, and the whole video collapses into one comparison. An $80 designer tie, fused interlining, polyester filler glued edge to edge, a shell that shines a little too hard under store lighting. Next to it, a $100 Sam Hober, hand-sewn from end to end, wool interlining that actually has memory, a shell that reflects light the way real silk does instead of imitating it. $20 separates them. $20 is the price of a sandwich and a coffee. On one side of that gap is a tie that stiffens, cracks at the fold, and holds the shape of the knot like a scar. On the other side is a tie that twists when you knot it and falls flat the moment you take it off, the same way it did the day you bought it, for as long as you own it. That gap is the entire argument, not $20 for a slightly nicer logo. $20 for the difference between an accessory that survives one season and one that survives a decade of Mondays. So the next time you are standing at a counter with a tie in your hand, do not look at the shine first. Do not look at the logo on the keeper loop. Turn it over, find the seam near the tip, and look for the stitch. If there is a loose thread, you can actually move with your finger, something sewed that tie together. If the edge is flat and sealed shut with no give at all, something glued it, and the clock on that tie already started running the moment you bought it. The seam does not lie, even when the price tag does. If this kind of breakdown is useful, subscribe, because we will keep opening up the things you wear to show you exactly what is holding them together, or what isn't. And drop a comment with the tie brand you have been wearing for years, the one you have never once thought to check. You might be surprised what you find on the inside.